Welcome back. Look around the room you are sitting in. What is the most expensive thing you own? Maybe it's your car, maybe it's your house. But if we look at the entire world economy, the most valuable thing isn't gold, it isn't oil, and it definitely isn't that crypto JPEG you bought in 2021. It is sand. Well, specifically, sand that has been melted, purified, and blasted with lasers until it can do math. We are talking about silicon chips. Right now, the United States and China are locked in a conflict that historians are already calling the chip war. There are no soldiers, no tanks, and no missiles, at least not yet. But the stakes are actually higher than in a traditional war, because whoever controls the chips controls the future. Today we are going to explain why the US government decided to essentially delete China's access to the most advanced technology on Earth. We will look at how people are smuggling computer parts like they are illegal drugs. And we will answer the big question. Is this strategy actually working? Or is the US accidentally creating a monster that will come back to bite it? Let's dive into the silicon curtain. To understand this war, you first have to understand the weapon. When we talk about chips, we are not just talking about the processor in your washing machine or the thing that makes your greeting card play, "Happy Birthday." We are talking about the absolute bleeding edge of technology. Specifically, GPUs. You might know GPUs. If you are a gamer, you know that a good GPU is the difference between seeing a beautiful, realistic open world and seeing a potato-shaped blob. But here's the secret. The same math that makes video games look good is the exact same math required to train artificial intelligence. ChatGPT, military targeting systems, hypersonic missile simulations, facial recognition, all of these things need thousands of these advanced chips working together. And right now, one company sits on the throne, NVIDIA. For a long time, trade was simple. NVIDIA is an American company. They designed the chips in California, had them built in Taiwan, and sold them to everyone, including China. China was a huge customer, buying billions of dollars worth of these chips to build their own AI and cloud servers. But then, the US government looked at the map and realized something terrifying. If China keeps buying these chips, they will eventually build AI that is smarter, faster, and more dangerous than American AI. They could crack military codes, design superior biological weapons, or create cyber attack systems that are unstoppable. So, in October 2022, and again in 2023, the US pulled the emergency brake. They introduced export controls. Essentially, they told NVIDIA and other companies, you can sell China the slow chips, you can sell them the old chips, but the new stuff, the stuff that powers the future, if you sell that to China, you're going to jail. This was an earthquake in the tech world. It wasn't just a tariff or a tax, it was a blockade. But here is where it gets complicated. You can't just ban the chip, you have to ban the machine that makes the chip. This brings us to the most important company you have probably never heard of, ASML. They are based in the Netherlands. They make a machine called an EUV lithography system. Let me explain how complex this machine is. It uses a laser to blast a tiny drop of tin 50,000 times a second to create light that is invisible to the human eye, to draw circuits on silicon that are smaller than a strand of DNA. It is the most precise machine humans have ever built. It costs hundreds of millions of dollars. And this is the kicker. ASML is the only company in the universe that knows how to make them. The US government knew that if China got these machines, they could just print their own chips. So, the US pressured the Netherlands and Japan to join the ban. Now, China cannot buy the chips, and they cannot buy the printers to make the chips. Imagine if you were banned from buying pizza, and you were also banned from buying flour, dough, and ovens. That is the situation. So, what happened next? Did China just say, okay, you got us, we give up? Of course not. This is where the story turns into a spy thriller. First, the black market exploded. Just like during the prohibition of alcohol, when there is demand, someone will find a supply. We have seen reports of people smuggling NVIDIA chips into China in the most ridiculous ways. One guy was caught at the border with hundreds of chips taped to his body, walking like a robot. There are networks of chip mules, but smuggling can only get you a few thousand chips. To run a superpower, you need millions. So China began the great workaround. Since they couldn't buy the super fast chips, they started buying millions of the slightly slower chips that were still legal. If you can't buy a Ferrari to win the race, you buy 1,000 Toyota Corollas and tie them together. It's not efficient, it uses a ton of electricity, but it works. And then came the shock. In late 2023, the Chinese tech giant Huawei released a new phone, the Mate 60 Pro. When Western experts took it apart, their jaws hit the floor. Inside was a chip, a 7-nanometer chip, that was made in China. According to the US sanctions, China shouldn't have been able to make this. They didn't have the ASML machines, but they did it anyway. It turned out they were hacking the older machines, pushing them beyond their limits, and innovating faster than anyone expected. This brings us to the part of the story that involves you, the US economy, and the risks of this strategy. Because this is not a one-sided beatdown. The US is taking a massive gamble. Here is the risk for the United States. First, the loss of revenue. China is the biggest market for chips in the world. Companies like NVIDIA, Intel, and Qualcomm make a huge chunk of their money there. When the US government says you can't sell to China, these companies lose billions in revenue. Why does that matter to you? Because that revenue is what pays for research and development. If Intel has less money, they build fewer factories in Ohio or Arizona. If NVIDIA has less money, the next generation of tech arrives slower. The CEOs of these companies have been quietly screaming at Washington saying, if you cut off our revenue, we won't be able to stay ahead of China for long. Second, the Galapagos effect. By cutting China off from the global system, the US has forced China to build its own system. Before the ban, Chinese companies were happy to buy American chips. It was easier and cheaper than making their own. But now, they have no choice. They are pouring billions of state money into their own domestic chip factories. Some economists argue that the US has created its own worst nightmare, a completely independent Chinese tech ecosystem that does not need America anymore. If they succeed, and that is a big if, they will never buy an American chip again. We might have just created a competitor that we can't sanction. Third, the retaliation. China isn't just sitting there taking punches. They have leverage too. Remember the periodic table from chemistry class? There are elements called gallium and germanium. You need them to make chips, solar panels, and military radars. Guess who produces 98% of the world's gallium? China. In response to the US chip ban, China started restricting exports of these metals. It's a tit for tat. You won't sell us the chips? Fine, we won't sell you the stuff you need to make the chips. This drives up prices for everyone. If this escalates, it could make electronics, electric cars, and green energy much more expensive for the average American consumer. And finally, there's the elephant in the room, or rather, the island in the room, Taiwan. We cannot talk about chips without talking about TSMC. The Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company makes 90% of the world's most advanced chips. They make the chips for Apple, for NVIDIA, for everyone. The US ban puts Taiwan in a very fragile spot. If China feels like they are being suffocated technologically, and they realize they can never catch up peacefully, some military analysts fear this increases the risk of an invasion of Taiwan, not just for land, but to seize the factories. If those factories in Taiwan stop working, due to war, blockade, or even sabotage, the global economy stops instantly. It would make the COVID supply chain crisis look like a minor inconvenience. No new phones, no new cars, no new servers, a global depression. So where does this leave us? The US strategy is clear. Buy time. Washington knows they can't stop China forever. The laws of physics work the same in Beijing as they do in Silicon Valley. Eventually, Chinese scientists will figure it out. The goal of the ban is to slow them down, to keep the US 5 or 10 years ahead. The idea is that if the US can reach superintelligence, or the next level of military tech first, they can set the rules for the rest of the century. It is a high-stakes game of keep away. On one side, you have the US trying to maintain its status as the world's technology superpower, protecting its military edge. On the other side, you have China, desperate to break out of the containment and prove that it can stand on its own. And in the middle are the companies losing billions, the smugglers taping CPUs to their legs, and us, the consumers, wondering why everything is getting more expensive and the geopolitical news is getting scarier. The chip war is not a Cold War. It is a hot war of engineering, espionage, and economics. And unlike oil, which you can just dig out of the ground, computing power has to be invented, refined, and manufactured with precision. We used to fight over spices. Then we fought over gold, then oil. Now we fight over sand that can think. And the winner of this war doesn't just get the money. They get to write the code for the future of humanity. Thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments. Do you think the US ban will stop China? Or did we just motivate them to become faster? And would you smuggle a graphics card for the right price? Just kidding, don't answer that. See you in the next one.